This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
Good evening. Tonight is the December 18th City Council Ordinance Committee meeting. Appreciate everybody being here. Sorry for the small confusion on the location. We have some minutes to approve this evening. I will take a motion to approve the meeting minutes for meeting minutes for October 22nd, November 12th, and October.
Someone.
In favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. The first order of business is to discuss the dispatch position. I know at our last meeting, Councilor Krasinski, you had some questions. You wanted to speak to some individuals regarding that position. Were you able to do that?
I was able to, and I have no further.
And you have no further questions. Great. Councilor Smith, did you have any questions regarding that? I know we went through the overview already regarding it.
Yeah, I was curious to know what the mayor's thought on it was, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so.
Yep. So I spoke with the mayor, and I know that Chief Alexander also spoke with the mayor. When I spoke to him, he was supportive of it, saw the need for it, and given the fact that funds were coming from not the city, but other funds, that he was in fact supportive of that. But Chief Alexander, is there anything that you would like to add to that?
No, you said it great. I spoke with the mayor at length a few times. He's in favor of it. Grant funding supports it for the first 3 years. And then along with in the intermunicipal agreement with Southampton, they're paying us $175,000 a year for dispatch, which will easily offset that cost and then some. So it just really makes sense for the city right now, especially with funding available.
Yeah.
See if there's any other. Is our HR director, is there anything that you would like to add regarding that?
I don't think I have anything additional. I mean, like you said, it's grant funded, which is great. So it isn't covered by the city. It's non-union, which I think is important because right now it's a lot for the chief to be managing both the police officers, their supervisors, and dispatch. I think it's really important to have someone who can directly, manage that stuff. So I think it's a good move for the city.
Good.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so much. So if there's no further questions, I'll take a motion to amend Exhibit A, classification of employees, to add position of public safety dispatch director.
So moved.
Second.
Second. So I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. So that we'll pass that. We'll go back to council, and we'd love to set up a public hearing for that as well. So awesome. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Appreciate all of you. Great. The next item on the agenda is the short-term rental. So I work with our planning director. We got feedback at the last city council meeting, and we went in and we reviewed based on comments that were made, just to kind of provide some context. I think when we originally had written this, we had added some additional language around codes and things like that to be able to provide context and pathways for people to provide understanding of it, etc. However, when building code and fire code kind of intersected, it just added confusion within the context of the ordinance. And so upon kind of realizing that and understanding that, we went back in and removed references to the codes, etc. And then also removed just items that did not necessarily have to be in there, that could be one pagers that the Board of Health could provide or our government could provide, etc. And so when we go in and we look at this, that's a lot of what has been removed. I understand that there is some questions regarding, for example, the Board of Health and the fire department being able to add additional items, etc., kind of on this one pager that is beyond this. And essentially what we are asking for is that on page 2, for example, what is redlined on that document, that is that's just really the one pager that would then be made available to the public, and that we are asking that people kind of adhere to that criteria that is being outlined. Same thing with the fire department, which is kind of later, which we'll get to. Same thing, some of the things that the fire department had asked for regarding first aid kits, etc. That would be removed from this because there's no reason for us to ask for gauze, bandages, and things like that within an ordinance. And so that would just be a one pager that, in addition to kind of meeting the other kind of requirements on a registration application, that is just something that would be outlined and expected to be in that as well. So for the committee, that's essentially what we had done, and then made some additional changes, etc. So, but at this time, you all have questions about kind of the ordinance and kind of what we have kind of discussed and kind of outlined here.
Question I have is, what do you think the changes really have clarified for the public?
Mm-hmm.
In what ways? Yeah.
Chair, if I may. And I don't know if Dave, Dan, and Ryan want to come up here as well. As we've learned more and more information that's coming through as recently as today, you would think that the building code and the fire code would provide some sort of consistency out there. And it actually does just the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And it's frustrating. It's frustrating for all of us, you and the community. And we understand that. Talking with representatives from the Department of Fire Services today who are fire protection engineers, just to share a recent case with the appeals board as of last week. And this was a Western Mass case as well, so it's applicable to the, obviously here. Last week, the appeals board had an appeal from a short-term rental in a single-family home, where the appeals board denied a compliance alternative of a fire extinguishers in the home, updated exit and signage, and updated and new smoke detectors. So what happened, to give you more context to that situation, it was a 1939 single-family home. The building official ordered it to be sprinklered. The homeowner appealed it to the appeals board. And because the application was not completed at first, it was returned, came back again and brought forward this as a alternative compliance measure. And even with that information, extinguishers, signage, and new smoke detectors, the appeals board denied it.
When you say new smoke detectors, what are you referring to? New,
brand new, sealed 10-year, sealed lithium-ion batteries.
so what would normally have been applied to a single-family residence
Or, yes,
was unacceptable
yes.
in
And
this current appeal for
Correct, because what they said was that is not, that does not provide the same level of protection as residential sprinklers.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think my first ask of this committee tonight is we don't make any decisions tonight. That's my first ask.
That's a reasonable ask in my opinion.
I think it then goes back to what was originally discussed with the hardwired interconnection monitored system. That is really, if anything is acceptable, that's what everyone is leaning towards right now. And I'll kind of pause right there. And if I misspoke, I'll defer to, for this one.
I mean, the gentleman he spoke to sits on the appeal board too.
He sits on the appeals board.
Yeah.
Just so you know, this,
It's not a random person.
right?
Yeah, so I think that, I'm not disputing that, that, alternative recommendation is, potentially something that would be allowed, right, and would be accepted by any board. It's not within the, codes, right, as they are outlined. So if that was something that was to be approved, et cetera, that could be something that was in the one pager that you all had outlined as the alternative. But it's not something that is by code, something that is required or recommended or whatever.
So, why my code is residential sprinklers.
Right, exactly. And so, exactly. So if there is an alternative, which has been outlined, it has been said that they are case by case examples, then why would that not just be the alternative that is being put forward? And then that's a genuine question I'm trying to understand. Like, if we're saying you must follow code and the code says X, Y, and Z, and that you all have the ability to have an alternative, why would that not just be the alternative that is put forward?
I think where the city needs to be careful is no matter who's in that building commissioner role, the potential liability that would place upon the city if something ever happened and they allowed what they determine to be an alternative compliance, and then someone gets injured or hurt in that short-term rental. And that's why trying to find that balance between the life safety of the occupants in there and finding the appropriate highest level of protection in there for those occupants. You know, you've heard Dave and I go back and forth publicly about sprinklers.
Not yet.
So, you know, the code reads sprinklers, and it's, I don't know, Dave, anything else I'm missing here that?
No, all I could really add to that is that throughout the building code, there are different levels of protection for specific, based on the use of a building. And one of the levels of protection that is thoroughly accepted by the building code is a monitored fire alarm system. That's something that appears in many situations where a fire protection system is required. So this appeals is based on a proposal. The failed appeal was based on a proposal to not do a monitored residential fire alarm system. That was denied. There's no way of knowing where that might go. I believe that a monitored residential fire alarm system is within reach of I think this is where this is probably going at the state level. There's been some No, I haven't spoken to anybody directly about this, but, so it is secondhand information that at the state level, this may be, there's a desire to amend the building code right now because sprinklers are very unpopular. There's a lot of pushback about this. And, but it's not gonna be, we already know now that it's not gonna be just upgrading your smoke detection system. That's really not cutting it. So there's something in between. That is a monitored residential fire alarm system. And I believe that that is the direction this is quite possibly going in as an amendment. But these things take a very long time. I mean, code changes are, it's kind of like doing anything in Easthampton, you know, through,
Okay, yeah, and I understand. So my question again is, what's the difference of, if that's the direction that it's going, and there's going to be an amendment to the code. So what's the difference between that and putting it in the ordinance? Help me understand if that, why would it be?
If I understand you correctly, I think one of the challenges, and I let off with this, is, you know, trying to find that consistency. And here we are with Dave in his current position, and he's saying that based on all the information from the state fire protection engineers, the fire department, this is what we're coming up with in terms of providing that template for the community. Dave leaves a year from now, a new building commissioner comes in, and an application comes in for a short-term rental, and that new commissioner says, okay, you don't have to do residential sprinklers, but your alternative compliance is put in an extinguisher over there. I have no say over that. It's the authority of the building commissioner. So now we have short-term rentals out there with no consistency and a lower level of protection, more importantly. By continuing to just gather more information, look at options, wait to get more information back from the state, this would at least solidify it until the state does potentially change the overall code.
Questions? And then I'll let you.
I just want to be sure I'm hearing this correctly. It sounds like the building commissioner's decision is based, although based on code, is an interpretation as to what level of protection we enforce.
no, it's not an interpretation. No, not
Then why would your decision be any different than the next person's decision? I thought I heard that earlier.
well, some things can be,
You said it, he didn't.
it's like interpretations. Where do you draw the line on what is an interpretation or not? I mean, is a dog a cat and a cat a dog? I mean, is that an interpretation, or there's some range
I didn't mean to go into that level of interpretation. I was referring to a different commissioner making a different decision using the same information.
I would say,
Call it whatever. I take back the word.
No, it's not an interpretation. It comes down to the same level of safety and intent that the prescriptive code requires. Prescriptive code requires sprinklers. So what is the same, what is a compliance alternative that could meet the same level of protection and meet the same intent for the sprinklers, for instance? So you could debate that reasonably to a certain degree. You certainly couldn't say, I think a fire extinguisher itself meets the same level of safety as a fire sprinkler system. So that's what I mean. Where, at what point does somebody's interpretation become absurd and arguable? Because that's what it can come down to. You know, somebody who, and I'll just say, you know, I know a lot of building inspectors. I believe some maybe are what I would refer to as activist building inspectors. They don't believe in building code at all. They got the job so they could, go get in a position to make life a lot easier for a lot of people by not enforcing the code. That's a problem. So that's what it comes down to. What is interpretation when you're talking about fire safety? How far can you go with that?
Should you have a different analysis? I'm trying to understand what you had said, that one commissioner and another commissioner, and how do we get in the middle and make a decision? As to
Dave, is it a fair statement that in 2 years from now, a new building commissioner comes in, someone applies, files a new application for short-term rental, and you say there needs to be sprinklers. They say we can't do that. Bring forward an alternative compliance. And that applicant comes forward with extinguishers and signage and new smoke detectors that meet the code of the building, the year the building was built. Not hardwired, not interconnected, not monitored. Could potentially some building commissioners agree to that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Would certain building commissioners say, well, okay, well, let's say it's hardwired, interconnected, but not monitored? That's even a higher standard than what you just said. If you said
I was just having a conversation.
Yeah, and I'm having a conversation that was extending it just a little bit more to say, everything but monitor.
I think that the takeaway here is we all agree the building commissioner, based on the code, has the final determination for alternative compliance. We all agree now that based on who's in that position, that alternative compliance is going to be different. That's the takeaway right there.
The alternative compliance may very well be different. Not it's going to be different.
It may be different. It may be different.
And Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are some commissioners right now that are just saying sprinklers.
That's exactly right.
Exactly.
No, there are commissioners now that are saying it requires sprinklers, and they're issuing letters of denial to applicants for their short-term rentals. So then those people go to the appeals board, which is what was described earlier.
So what we're
The first appeal that we know of, that I know of so far to this has
Correct.
failed. Yeah.
Nope. Finish, go ahead. I just had a thought, so I was like,
So we're trying to fix it on the local level.
So what we're trying to do is provide a template and consistency until that building code does change. That's fair?
If it
Exactly.
Here sometimes, but hopefully this is a little bit.
So that's all.
so now I have a question. Councilor Smith, did you have a question?
That's your recommendation, or that's the law?
The law sprinklers.
So putting it as the code versus putting what we're saying and saying, here's the current code on a different paper. I can see where, from a fire perspective, it's like we have the best protection now because we've gone those extra steps. I can also see where the people who have to buy the equipment for those extra steps are going to be hoping that there would be someone who's not going to have that much of a interpretation that would be the $5,000 equipment. And so I don't think we're arguing whether or not you agree that that is the interpretation right now, but to have the interpretation written into the ordinance, that is where we're wondering, does that have to be done or not? And what is the cost if it's done, and what's the cost if it's not? And I'm hearing the side from the fire safety perspective, and I completely understand that and appreciate it. There's also the cost saving side, and aside from being told the statistics of how many people have died already, I don't feel like I'm getting that side of the story where it's like, okay, it's not addressing what the concerns of the public are having. And so I have two different levels here. One is that this came kind of out of nowhere from the last minute, and the way that it was introduced after we had been meeting for this many months, has been really abrupt for a lot of people who have been involved in the process. And in the same way, I think that alternative from a sticker shock perspective, having it written there, I think it does have that where people might not even do it in the first place because they're going to be like, oh, well, that's the thing. But then if they had to appeal and they had to talk to you about why it was that, I just feel like,
I guess what I'd just to add to that is I'm imagining myself as the person who you're talking about who's sitting there saying, I have an empty ADU or an empty space, not an ADU, but an empty space. And we're not going to go to the ADU right now. That's different. But an empty space, an empty, whatever that is, but built a long time ago. I really don't have a use for it being rented full time. I can't because somebody else is going to be coming in. I know my family's going to be staying this time. I said, but I could use a short-term rental here or a short-term rental there or there. Am I really a commercial operation or am I letting out a family home space in a family home? And if I'm letting out space in a family home, it's periodic. I'm not making $5,000 a year, let's say, or 10 or 15 or 20 or 80. So I'm not in the commercial business. The commercial standards will be applied to me. I'm just providing a nice home for the weekend or for a week for somebody to come see us. I'm going to be forced out of the bit. I'm not going to play that. I'm going to call it a game. It's not a game. It's serious business, but I'm not going to play that. I'm not going to get involved. Where does that leave us? We have to make a decision eventually as to how we're going to move on that.
mm-hmm.
I tell you, my heartstrings are very much with the person who would be struggling. If somebody is running a commercial enterprise, sure, apply commercial standards. We're talking about residential properties in residential neighborhoods that aren't commercial operations. So I see a little bit of a difference in standard at this point.
I think what's unfortunate is this has been in the code since 2017. And we finally have a building inspector that's competent in the codes. So
and we're
grateful
for
the city not to act upon it over the last 8 years is problematic right there. But we'll put that aside for a minute. As we are all learning, information is coming in, as of today. So I get the frustrations. It's frustrating for all of us. But this has been on the book for 8 years now. And we finally have someone who is competent in those codes, and we're trying to figure this out. And it's not easy. So
I know your heart and your interests are very much in, but it's from the fire perspective, it's from the safety perspective. I get that.
Right. And I use the term balance, like trying to work with the homeowners to make sure that their occupants and their properties and their investments are all protected. But at the same time, it's easy to say, how do you put a dollar amount on a life? And that's true. Right now there's legislation pending here in the state. It's called the Maggie Hubbard Law. And that's based off a family down in the Cape who lost their daughter in a short-term rental. And that's one of the pieces of legislation that's coming forward, talking about hardwired interconnected systems. So again, things are changing every day. And I wish it was easier, but that's why I made the comment earlier. I don't think my suggestion to the group would be, please don't make a decision tonight. Let's continue to gather information as it's coming in, and try to put something together that will work for everyone.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question for Chief and David, actually. Chief, I know you're talking about hardwired system, which we're proposing. So I had ADT into my house just to talk to them and just trying to get a lot of information. And they do a secondary system that's Wi-Fi. Well, it's not Wi-Fi, it's cellular from the cell towers. And it's a secondary system where like all of my current smoke alarms stay in place. And they put another one right next to all of them, heat detectors in the attic and that. And that was significantly less expensive than a hardwired system. And the poor guy, I asked him so many questions. I had already had backward securities into my house. And he was like, it's basically the same, except for it's not wired in, basically. And I said, that means I'm going to have 10 smoke alarms in my house. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, all right. I mean, I don't care, right? I'm just wondering, my question is this guy comes and he talks to me and he says, this is basically the same system that you got quoted $4,200 for. And so I'm asking you guys, I mean, that was $1,200, right? Is that okay? Or are you going to make it be hardwired? Because when I talk to Hackworth, they're like, Mindy, a commercial system has a red box in your closet and a residential has a brown box. And I'm like, what's the difference? He's like, nothing, except for the color of the boxes. So I'm also trying to understand this out and trying to comply and be proactive and work with you guys. And so my question is it good enough to have and the ADT rings right to the fire department? That's when I ask them, they go right there and they call me second. And so Captain Dan, all you guys, is that good enough?
Yeah, so before Captain Dan goes, thank you for looking at some of the options and alternatives and bringing forward that information. Dan's the expert and.
Yep.
No, so what we have to look at is the specifications and is it UL approved, right? And then does it follow, NFPA 72, does it follow the current standards? So we have to make sure it's standard, just like everything else, kind of like we purchase, right? The appliance that are UL approved and stuff. They've gone through these testing periods and stuff to make sure that they are. So we'd have to look at that.
So is it something I can put you in touch with
Yeah,
the guy?
send me
I can
the,
talk to him.
absolutely.
He,
Of course.
with us, he said pretty much the same thing as Hackworth, but he said, I maybe do this one thing different. And I was like, all right, I'm good with that.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested in it now. Yeah, yeah, please do.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will email you that.
Okay.
Thank you.
May I have a question? Mindy,
Yes.
does that include then a monitoring? fee?
The monitor was about, $30 a month, $19 or $30 a month. I can't
It's a cell
remember.
phone that calls that way, even if the electricity goes out or the phone lines go out.
So another
it still
300,
calls.
This doesn't
possibly
have-
$360 a year.
Yeah.
It's a cell. It's a
Possible.
Yeah, it's a
On the
cell.
side.
There's a couple different, there's the, ADT, Google bought 14% of ADT. So there's the Google ADT system, and they can use the Honeypot system. So they both use a keypad, but so they're a little different. And if anybody cares after the meeting, I'm happy to tell you all about it.
So Mindy, you can get that to Captain Constantine.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the different components would be also does it go to a central station, which is also UL approved and stuff, so it's different components that we can look at,
Yeah.
stuff with that, so, yeah.
Great.
And Rocky, you had a question? Just real quick.
Well, I guess I'm confused because I keep reading, I'm trying to like catch up on things. One of the things that, she, said was that the building inspector was the person who had the authority to enforce the sprinklers and that sort of thing. But according to the memorandum that was from January 24, it says that the head of the fire department is given the statutory authority to enforce the law. So that's why I got confused. I'm like, I don't understand. It seems to me like the building code is definitely what the building inspector is responsible for, but that the fire code is what you guys.
I wonder if they're talking about 14826H.
It's probably like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's,
Dan can explain that.
yeah, so you probably weren't here at the last meeting, so two different things, a sprinkler, okay, the building code has the sprinkler, what we've been talking about, right? There's a separate law, it's actually law, so it's not code, so it is what it is, and it's 14826H, and what
Yeah.
it says is, basically is if you have, it's called a lodging house, but the sprinkler board has ruled that lodging in this particular case, short-term rental is the same thing.
So
So
wait,
if you have-
wait, well, that confuses me too,
Yeah.
because
So this is,
really because
this
of-
is under the fire code, so this isn't under the building.
so according to the fire code, a short-term rental is a lodging house?
So according to the 148-26.
Which is law.
Yeah, let me explain.
Oh, yeah,
law.
please do.
Right, which is law. So this law says that if you have a lodging house, if you rent to 6 or more who aren't in the second kindred, right, you have to have sprinklers.
Mhm.
So what's gone forward is the sprinkler board has heard appeals, and they've ruled that a lodging house for this particular law, when they apply this, okay, is the same as a short-term rental. So short-term rental, they consider a lodging house for this particular law.
Mhm.
So when they do rulings on it, they're looking at it under the lodging. So, and if you have, and that's why I had put it in the original, ordinance, was to put that. The only reason I put that in there was so everybody was aware of that, so they wouldn't get blindsided. And we spoke about that that's separate. So if you rent to 6 or more, you absolutely have to put sprinklers in.
Mhm.
And the chief we would be the ones that would issue that order.
Mhm.
And again, there's an appeal process for that too. You can go through, but we were bound by law to do that and issue that order. And that's separate from the building code. That makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does, I guess, but I'm also,
So can we,
I didn't mean it,
like we've talked about this several times, so I just wanna,
May I make a clarification?
yes,
please.
Of this statement? Just so I got it right,
Sure,
because
yeah.
this is all very complicated.
It is, yeah,
Everybody
very much so.
Law 148-26H
Yes.
deals with
Sprinkler system.
sprinkler systems, and defined within it is lodging houses. That's what the law says. I haven't.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, somebody ruled that the lodging house definition, which is not part apparently of 148-26H.
Right.
Somebody ruled, an appeals board ruled that short-term rentals were part of, to be defined as lodging house for the purposes of this law. It's not in the law.
Correct.
If I'm understanding you correctly, that this is the case. That may be where the rub really is that look, it's the state looking at the law and saying, well, is this really the way we want this to be? I'm trying to think through a solution for everybody, or it is what we want, and that's what, the appeals board either had it right or didn't have it right in the legislature's definite mind. Thank you. That I needed that clarification just to see where the rub was and where the pressure point may be that resolves it for us.
other questions from the council?
Shoot, I just had another question about it. Okay. So I guess this conversation tonight, we're now looking into an alternative to the hardwired to see if that would fit the intention. I think speaks to what we're saying, that we know those laws are going to change, and we know that we're going by the current ones. And so just trying to seek more clarification for why we want all the detail for what those current laws are, because it just seems like that would make our ordinance continually change as a result. And we're just saying, let's take out that language so our ordinance aren't continually having to be updated with the minutia of how the laws change, and just put in, look at the current laws.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I don't understand why that is not okay. And from what I'm hearing, you're saying it's because if we have a new building inspector, he might interpret the laws differently.
Correct.
Or she might, or
Correct.
they might. But at the same time, if we have outdated laws in our ordinance, wouldn't that also be a bit of a mess?
Is there a way to, with what Mindy was suggesting, is there a way to reword it to capture that type of system or no? Hardwired,
Look at that.
if it was written as hardwired or um,
And the
similar in capabilities.
72 or UL or whatever.
Right.
I could look at that, yeah. Because
Hardwired or similar in capabilities.
So that's something to get looked into.
yes. Yeah.
Yep, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I appreciate Chief Morris's comments about taking a pause and getting more information. We've also been talking to other communities in the Berkshires who are facing the same confusion, I would say. And it does seem like the state has fallen short on consistent and clear guidance around this. I do agree with Tamara about trying to make the law as much just referring to state code, though, because I went through the ordinance review committee process and we had to go through, it took us a lot of energy to just pull all this stuff out that was specific and not, and like redundant, or it should just refer to the state laws, I feel like.
Yep, great.
And I just
Good
wanted,
question.
no, I just wanted to reiterate along with that, that if we go stricter than the state law, it has to go to the Attorney General to get approved to be in this ordinance.
I think there's some confusion around that. I spoke to the fire marshal's office and they said that that was true for towns, but not cities. So I think there's some confusion there. So that's what I found out, but so we spent a lot of time on that alternative being in this, other things within the ordinance, just so we don't have to rehashing a lot. Like if we can narrow some of these things down before we come back, that would be great. But just for the counselors again.
I'm still concerned about the capping at a lot of 50. And looking at the alternative, we had a process where I think much higher with 75 and then there was a compromise to say 50 plus 5 or 10% increase to accommodate any new people who might be interested in applying, because we were right near the cap between 47 people and 50 people operating now currently approximately. And that only left 3 new registrations. And if somebody comes in and the neighborhood comes in and says, I don't want any of that, and they are disingenuous about it, they're really locking out opportunities for other people. And by being disingenuous, I'm saying they go ahead and apply for licenses, don't use it for registration, don't use this. They go ahead and say, yeah, give me, I want to register my home. I want to register my home. I rather register my home. And now all of a sudden, all 50 are gone. Oh, well, I guess nobody else could do it. And I don't think that's our intent. Our intent was to have some small growth over time. That was built into the original ordinance. This is so hard and such a complicated process that I hate to set up a system where we don't have that flexibility initially. If we need to review it in the future, we couldn't cut it back or freeze it.
So
we could put in a cap like 75.
I know you want a higher cap. So the original intent was actually, it started out as 50 and the mayor asked for a 10% increase because she wanted the revenue of that. So it always started at 50. So that was always the original. But let me keep going. The other piece of this is there's less than 47 because people have multiple kind of things. So that's one piece. But the other important piece is that when we discuss with fire department, when we talk to the building inspector, when we talk to the health department, we said, what is a reasonable number for you all so that you can kind of, this is be a new thing for you as well. Like, what's a reasonable number that you could wrap your head around and feel like you were doing a quality job? And they said, we think that we can do 50. And so I think that's just where the 50 has started. I think the other thing is this recognition that we're in a housing crisis right now for folks who are trying to rent within the city. And if we allow for more, the reality is people are going to stop renting long-term and they're going to take those things off. And that just creates potentially, I see that you disagree with that, potentially.
I would
there's not
disagree.
the market for that. So, but still, there's still that concern out there, right? So I think
I just wanted to lay that on the table as something that's still a concern.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. So
You asked for it.
Yeah, no, I did. So,
Alright.
Councilor Smith, do you?
I have a, it's not a concern, just more of a clarification.
Mhm.
So when someone has a hardwired machine, fire alarm, and they keep having false alarms go off and the fire department, keeps having to come out, at what point does that turn into a nuisance where they would have to pay for those services coming out?
So right now in the city of Easthampton, they have a false alarm ordinance for the police department. There's not one as such you're talking about for fire yet.
Okay.
In Easthampton, when you look at our calls and calls for nuisance alarms,
Mhm.
it's not to that point yet. But there is a city ordinance for the police side.
But I assume that if we have a lot more hardwired, if we suddenly have 50 hardwired places that we didn't before, the likelihood of that becoming a nuisance is a lot higher.
The nice thing about the low voltage smoke detector systems is they're a lot more reliable with false alarms than say like 120 volt smoke alarms. So there's less incidence of those actually malfunctioning and stuff.
So do you not anticipate needing to ever charge someone for a false alarm because it would happen so infrequently?
I think if it happens so frequently, it is probably something awry with the system.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd probably work on them with that.
But you don't see it coming into creating ordinance that would actually say you're going to have to pay X amount of dollars if a false alarm comes after 3 times, if we make 3 trips out.
I'll share with you in Northampton, we had one, and the city ordinance was after the third, you had 3 activations. After the third one, a fee of $50 would be issued. But if the homeowner was able to produce documentation that they had a company coming in and fixing it or servicing it or whatever, then that fee would be waived. So the intent of fees are not to collect the money. The intent of the fees is to just leverage people keeping up their system. We're not looking to collect money. We want the system to be functional.
Yeah, and I was just asking at what point does it start to be too much, you know what I mean? Like if it started to be 5 extra calls a day where the fire department was going around the city, do we have a problem on our hands? Or would it still be, that's not so big of a thing? Like just when does that cross from manageable to nuisance? Do we know what that would be?
No, it would just be a guess right now, but if there was 5 extra calls a day for that would be fine.
You have a dispatch,
Yeah.
I tend to go dystopian future.
Yeah, no, that would be a challenge if it was 5 more calls.
And the nice thing too is, with something like that, again, I would be tasked with working with the homeowner like I do with commercial systems right now to figure out what's going on. It might be, a fact that maybe a smoke detector was placed too close to the kitchen or something like that. And we can, change that out for a heat detector. But work with people with that too. So I always try to work, or maybe it's a ventilation where, the stove really needs to be ventilated, outside instead of back inside. So, we look to mitigate some of those things to help them. So that's one of my tasks, my jobs.
so no heat detector over the stove.
No, yes, that's a good idea.
Other questions from the councilors?
Those are my big ones coming in tonight. Was first of all, understanding what would be lost if we didn't have it in detail. And the second one was, okay, coming from the other perspective, at what point could this become a nuisance where we would then be putting more code on it for consequences if that was happening?
So if I'm reading the room, so we want to table this until we get more information regarding it.
I'm ready to vote. No. Yes, I'd make a motion to table this until another meeting where we have more answers to some of our questions.
I would,
Second one.
I'm thinking you just caught up on the word table. I never really built tables.
Yeah, I guess continue.
Continue is probably a
Continue this conversation.
Absolutely.
Second. All right. So I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, so we will continue this conversation. Certainly appreciate the conversation. I think there's a lot of concern, question of like what makes the most sense in terms of keeping such things in the ordinance, having them outside the ordinance, and trying to be able to kind of navigate those because laws change. And so I try to understand that. So certainly appreciate all of you and the work that you do and continuing to have this conversation.
Yes, thank you all.
Again, appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jana and Pam, are you? I see you. Can you? You. Move on to the zoning ordinance recommendation report. This is really just talking tonight about sections 1 through 4. Jana and I asked you to, again, just kind of give us an overview. I know that as a committee, we had talked about this previously, but sadly, or unfortunately, Councilor Kwasinski was not here at that time. So I do know that Councilor Kwasinski, you have had a conversation with Kayam about the document. So Jana, if you just want to refresh or remember just a little bit about the sections, and then we can have a conversation with questions if people have them.
Sure. And I'm sorry I'm not there with you. I've been battling a cold all week, and I thought I would keep my germs to myself. So I'm going to go over sections 1 through 4 of our recommendations from the zoning report. Section that the first one is pretty easy. It's updating the language from the Department of Housing and Community Development, DHCD, to their new name, which is the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. So there's several places in the zoning ordinance that reference DHCD, and we're just recommending that we change all of those references to EOHLC. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah? Okay, great. The camera is super weird, and mostly I can only see your feet, so it's very hard to tell.
Shoes on, so that's good.
I can see Connie's water bottle really well. Okay, the second one has to do with parking minimums.
Actually, before you go on, are there questions about this thing?
What you recommended?
Yeah. Continue, Jana. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Section number 2 is about parking minimums. So we spent a lot of time looking at the various parking requirements that we have in the zoning ordinance currently. Parking minimums create undue barriers to developing multifamily housing, particularly for smaller lots and smaller projects. The Easthampton Housing Production Plan actually notes that the current parking requirements may inadvertently discourage multifamily development. And so we are recommending, based on all of the review of all of the parking requirements that we looked at, adopting a 1 parking minimum requirement across all the multifamily housing. So if you look in the zoning, there's actually different parking minimums based on different types of multifamily housing, which is really confusing. And so our recommendation is that we adopt 1 parking minimum requirement for all multifamily housing set at 1.5 spaces per unit, which could be reduced to an average of 1 space per unit based on the unit mix and project location. So if you were in, for example, downtown, maybe having 1 parking space per unit would be possible, more feasible for the project. Yeah, I'll stop talking. Any questions about the parking minimum or discussion?
I just want to make sure, you said at one point the parking minimum was for 1, but then you set it for 1.5?
So we
So-
recommend adopting one parking minimum for all multifamily housing. Right now, based on the type of multifamily housing, there are different parking minimums.
Mm-hmm.
So we are suggesting we have one standard.
Yeah, oh, okay, a single, okay, I thought you meant one car.
Sorry,
So
yeah,
like, wait a minute, that, so, yeah.
a single parking standard.
10,000. All right.
Was this a question?
One space per unit downtown and 1.5 across the board elsewhere in all residential and other districts except for the downtown district.
I use the downtown as an example. So what we're recommending is 1.5 spaces per unit, which could be reduced to an average of 1 per unit based on the unit mix and project location, and that would be up to the permitting entity.
What does 1.5 spaces look like?
Um,
So in a 90 unit development, it would be 90 plus 45, so 135 spaces.
Okay. Thank you. I was imagining half the space.
Yeah, no, you round up. You would
You have to cut your car in half.
I don't know, I'm like kind of different look plane than
round
everyone
up, and the
today.
benefit is that it gives like visitor spaces.
Thank you. So, fair enough. Of the unit.
Other questions?
How does that compare to what we have today? And you said we're all over the map today.
I could tell you, let me look at my little chart here. So currently regular multifamily is 1 for each bedroom in each unit plus 1 additional visitor space for every 10 units in the development. And multifamily housing with 15% affordable units is what we are recommending, which is 1.5 spaces per unit, which could be reduced to 1 unit based on unit mix. So
one right now it's 1 per bedroom.
yes, which is a lot of parking.
Plus one for every 10 units.
One for every bedroom in the unit. Plus,
Your bedroom unit knows you could have 2 bedroom units across the board, and you'd have 180 plus another 189 versus 9. You said 120, 135. So it'd be a reduction of about, in this case, about a 1/3 reduction from the current standards. Am I rephrasing it correctly? If we were to use the example of 90 units.
I think so.
Is that correct?
189.
About a third off the 100.
Units or spaces?
Spaces.
Spaces.
Sorry.
That's okay.
But yeah,
Mhm.
a little.
What exactly the percentage?
28%.
28% reduction. But that didn't account for the downtown adjustments that could be made on the case by case basis, which would then be less. Is that
Right.
correct?
This would be a 50%.
That would be closer to a 50% reduction. At the discretion of the permit granting authority, whoever that be.
Mhm.
Okay. Want to be sure I got that right.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Okay, the next section, section 3 is fair housing compliance. This section, our recommendations here were just to kind of clean up places where some of this guidance is already regulated by the state or the federal government based on the funding entity. So some places it seemed redundant. In our original recommendations, we had some changes to section 7.464, but we now know that has to stay as is because that is specific language from EOHLC regarding I think
Smart
it's
growth zoning
smart
districts.
growth zone. Yes, thank you.
Was that, which is regarding,
So when the city, if any municipality adopts smart growth zoning, the state has certain requirements of what has to be included in that zoning ordinance.
Right.
And some of this language is related to that.
So that recommendation that we made in our original document, we're, I guess, striking because we have to leave it alone in the zoning. And in the marked up version that Kayam sent prior to the meeting, 7.464 remains the same.
just for clarification purposes, if I may?
Yeah.
That would be, I understand the reasoning for striking the proposed language, but what was the reason for putting it in and making the change from your perspective?
From our perspective, it was a little too prescriptive and would be, again, regulated by the state. So for example, it talks about, the affordable rental units and how the rent is set. And from our perspective, it felt like that would be regulations that would be in other documents. And we didn't need to put it in our zoning because it could change and then our zoning would be outdated and not match the funding entity. But because we have to keep it in for the smart growth zoning, then we're just going to leave it alone.
I'll leave it alone. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep. Then a couple other references in this section, just kind of have to do with either places where we thought things were redundant or, again, determined by the funding source. So for example, section 8.344 talks about the selection of qualified buyers for the affordable housing units. And again, those are things that are administered by the qualified, agency that's running the housing, doing the affordable housing administration. So it doesn't need to be in the zoning because it's going to, and again, can change based on the funding source and what's going on with the state. So we just don't want to be in a place where we have to update the zoning if something changes at the state level.
That would certainly make sense that we have zoning that accommodated various different funding sources and their specific requirements. I presume then we would have the ability through the planning department, through the planning board, to look at the funding source and say, geez, that seems to be not in the way we like to do business. And we're not interested in this project. Is that possible? Some way that you could look at the funding source and say, otherwise we're just subject to any funding source that comes along and whatever they write. Oh yes, that's what we'll do. Is that really the position we're in?
No, so the way the ordinance is written is like we have bare minimums, like it has to be 15% affordable up to 80% of the area median income. And then usually the funding source will have a different ratio that they want. So we typically the funding source would want more than what we ask for, if that makes sense.
They would ask for standards that would be higher than our acceptable standards to qualify for this.
Right. So most subsidy, like low income housing tax credits, they want to see a certain percentage of units affordable at like 60% of the area median income or 50 or 30%. Whereas our regulations set the minimum at 80% of the area median income. So it's less affordable. Our restrictions require less affordability than
less restrictive.
Than most funding sources. Yes. But that changes over time.
Yeah, and if we want the money from the project, then we agree to their stand. Right? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, typically, there's not really a whole lot of funding sources, and so to build
these days.
Yeah, to build affordable housing, you're really talking about the low income housing tax credit project, and so developers, if they want to build affordable housing, that's really what they're using, and those are the rules that we developers will have to abide by those rules.
Thank you.
And then the last part of this section on fair housing has to do with the definition of family. Our current definition states individuals related by blood, marriage, and or adoption, or a group of unrelated individuals not to exceed 4 who are occupying a dwelling unit. The housing partnership believes that this fails to recognize, a wide range of common household configurations, such as cohabiting friends, unmarried couples, multi-generational households. So we looked at a lot of different definitions of family from other cities and towns across Massachusetts. And our recommendation is that we change our definition of family to all the people who occupy a single unit, regardless of their relationship to one another. It's just simplified, easier to understand.
Questions about that?
So why do we have a family definition? If the definition is to be changed to pretty much anybody living there.
So we
I'm
have
just confused.
single family, 2-family, multi-family, and so it just like single family dwelling, how you define what is a single dwelling is based on having complete housekeeping facilities, so kitchen, bathroom, living space, and then the family within it. Glad for fire department and building permit, because they'd probably get into like lodging house and all of that. It's to clarify, it's to clarify some of the differences in those situations. I think it's more of a cultural holdover from different times when there was a more traditional sense of what a home looked like.
I agree with that, and I also think there are so many legal definitions of family. I mean, there's the labor definition of family, there's the family courts definition of family, and then there's the housing definition of family. And I feel like those two will take care of things if they're not going well within the family, but from the housing perspective, if I had, let's suppose I'm an adult right now in my 50s and I had my 4 kids with 4 different men, does that mean that we wouldn't be related because I didn't have a legal relationship with them? And in that way, my kids and any step parents in the house are not legal family members. So I think this is really taking some of the language that creates unnecessary configurations and taking it out of it.
I'm in full agreement that the definition of family has changed over time, and we've reached a point where it isn't the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s definition of family. If there was a definition at that time, I think there was. And what's popping in my mind is a college town, like totally overrun, 30,000 students, 40,000, whatever there is. And you're in the college town, and the language I recall is family. We have to have, we can't have 16 unrelated parties occupying a unit. How do you begin to, have we addressed that issue? In some ways, not that we're a college town and not that we foresee that kind of problem, but I thought that was
I
some of the
think that's
logic and reasoning for defining a family as related parties as opposed to unrelated, just to kind of control numbers.
But we already
and
have like over 6 people in a house. Like we already have, I mean, I know it doesn't account for affordable housing, but we do have numbers where they were just saying, 6 people or more. If you're having an Airbnb with 6 people or more, they're automatically, their laws are going to kick in. And so why would we need to define?
Why do we have any definition of family is my question. That's what I'm driving at. Why is it included? Why are you making a recommendation to address the naming of a group if the group means everybody? Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
It it's currently a definition in the zoning. I mean, I suppose we could strike it.
Coming to you.
Yeah, I would want to look more to see what implication that would have, like on other sections.
It sounds like that's what
Like
we're doing
critical
de
to-
facto. Why not just do it if that's what we're really doing de facto?
I think that was one of the options that the committee considered when we were preparing this, and we decided to. I think we took this model definition from Medford, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yep.
So just wanted to put that out on the table.
Yeah.
You'll look into it further to see if that makes sense. It doesn't, it seems incongruous to have a definition of family that says nothing. It
Well,
doesn't,
it
it
says
doesn't,
everything.
Well, it would have to be-
except that it says everything.
Yeah,
So
it's-
why bother to have it in there?
It would likely have to be carried through in other places, like for example, the single family versus multifamily dwelling. That's a definition in and of itself as a single family dwelling.
Right.
So,
Or you could call
Family
it a
is
single
in-
dwelling.
right, but that's what I mean. You'd have to carry it through. Like you'd have to find all the references and make sure that it's not leaving some conflicts by taking it out.
I mean, in my opinion, it just feels like the more, I'm gonna use the word safe, because then I think it just adds on more work. To have to go through and like, make sure everything like aligns and everything like that, so that's just my kind of opinion, but.
To get rid of the term family
No,
altogether.
to keep it, because then I think it just, or we would have to go through the rest of everything to make sure that that new definition or no definition would align with what is in existence. But
Yeah, I mean, historically, these kinds of definitions are meant to exclude people rather than include them. So from my perspective, creating a really staunch definition of family ultimately is going to be one that someone's doesn't fit. And I can see
So-
that.
Why mention it?
Exactly. I can see that going away, that term going away easier than like the maximum number of people that can be living in one unit because you've overreached the fire code. But yeah, I agree with you. So I would love to hear more of what you find on it.
I think it's more just going to be more carrying it through and changing family for unit when talking about numbers of.
Yeah.
Yeah, on initial search, there's over 150 mentions of family in the zoning ordinance.
Just wanted to point out what seemed to be somewhat incongruous. Having a definition that didn't define anything. I'm sorry,
No.
that's what it seemed like. Okay, then call it that. And then if we look into that, do we want to have any restrictions on the numbers of people? Because it seemed like a family, unrelated parties issue was what had been driving at in the past, and folks felt, geez, we don't want to be out of compliance with the number of people who end up occupying a unit. If I sublet this room and that space, and they cut the room in half, how do you begin to, do we need any control over that? It was just a thought.
But I think that control comes from fire code.
And I think Board of Health typically has,
There are codes from the Board of Health on the number of people that can occupy a space in
Per
a given
square feet,
based on square footage and the number of bedrooms, et cetera.
But again, you do.
But we don't refer to that in our zoning.
No, but our zoning does allow things like lodging, boarding houses in different locations than it allows like a single family. And so it's that question of when it changes from one to the other.
From a
And
single
without having
dwelling
the
unit to-
definition of family, you're definitely blurring the lines. Because you could build a brand new house with sprinklers in it and it would meet the fire code and building code for a lodging house.
So we could put a lodging house in any zone.
Any zone that allowed multifamily. Well, no, actually any zone, like as long as it's just one kitchen. That's a lot of the times what they fall back on, like how they define how many units there are.
Thank you.
So I have a house in my neighborhood that's owned by ServiceNet.
Yeah, that's a different.
Okay.
So yes, so that's like congregate housing and it's illegal to treat people with disabilities living together, even if they're unrelated, differently than a related family.
Mhm.
They're living in the property the same way a family would, so they're exempt. That's a different.
I was just curious. Yeah,
Yeah, the Fair Housing Act specifically addresses that. The state and federal.
Okay. Any other questions regarding this? And then Jana, one last section.
So the last section has to do with the term community character in the zoning. So the term character appears 25 times in Easthampton's current zoning regulation, but it's never clearly defined and it's used in various ways. The concept of community character often invokes personal feelings, sort of how I might feel about the character of my city might be entirely different from the way Kayam or Ben or Lindsay feels about the character of the city. And so it feels really, really subjective and sort of neither fair nor appropriate to expect volunteer planning or zoning board members to evaluate applications based on clear and subjective parameters regarding community character. And so we are recommending that we remove all the references that are vague and undefined in the zoning related to character. There are several areas where we recommend leaving it as is, where it is more defined in what it's discussing, such as the agricultural character. But in most cases, it has no added value to the zoning requirements and is sort of already discussed in other pieces of the section. So we included in our recommendation a really detailed table. Councilor Denham, do you want me to go through each section?
Do people have questions? Well, I asked you all to read it. So were there any things that like stood out? So we don't have to go through each of them or do you want to go through each of them?
I don't feel the need to go through each of them tonight as
Right.
Yeah.
I don't feel the need to go through them tonight. I'd like to preserve that. Maybe revisiting at some point, but certainly to understand the concept of removing community character, I wanted to be sure I understood the full concept. And I understand its vagueness, and I understand that it would be helpful but it has meaning for somebody. I'm not sure who.
Well, to Cameron's point earlier about terms used for exclusion, community character.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm listening.
Yeah.
It's often used for exclusionary purposes.
Right, I understand, and I'm not thinking of that as being what is the intent of this group. I think the intent of this group is to here is removing character. No more characters. And that seems a shock to me that maybe we have a brand, maybe we have a way of saying, geez, I want to live in Easthampton because it has the old downtown buildings. And yes, and has a sense of the 1800s and the early 1900s. Character-wise, I think it is character in terms of the architectural. And yes, if we define it as architecture, but then I'm specifically talking about that to me.
Their recommendations did include some substitutions like that.
And keeping those. I saw that, and that makes sense. How do we preserve? Maybe we preserve it through the definition of historic districts and working on historic districts more. I don't understand which areas of the city, but certain neighborhoods have historic character. It was built in the 1930s or the 1940s, and they have that sense. If you go up Main Street, that the section Knight Avenue, Wright Avenue, I think has a character to it. We're not going to try to keep that in some way. I'm trying to understand, and maybe there's another words or other terms that help to define it, unless we don't care to preserve certain feelings people get when you come into a certain community. When I look at the clock tower that we own the tower, the clock in the Congregational Church in the center of town. That to me is a treasure, and that provides something about the character of the city. And I was very concerned about the sign ordinance and how that would be changed when we were discussing the sign ordinance, and we were going to create electronic signs, which to me was an example of not keeping the same community character. When the church was built, that's not the kind of sign. But what they built around the sign, around the electronic board, was to place it in with white posts, which fit perfectly in blending with the church. And I'm so impressed with the way that was done. I'm thinking that maybe that's kind of the way we look at community character conceptually, is to maintain a feeling of why do people want to come here?
I don't think where there's a particular character. I mean, that was my, Jen, I don't know if you want to speak to the.
Well, this is the exact reason why it's problematic in the zoning, because we could all sit there and have different characters. And then you ask the zoning board and the planning board to enforce the community character. So I think that what you're opening up, JP, could be a whole separate discussion if somebody wanted to introduce specific historic districts or whatever. That's another conversation, and that would have to be public hearing, and people discuss that and have buy-in. But the real problem right now is that there is no detailed description of that. So right now it can be used to the discretion of whoever's gatekeeping in that moment.
Right. Wanted to put that out on the table when we remove community character in a wide way, just to give it some pause and some thought as we do so.
Mm-hmm. Jen, you want to say something?
Well, I was just going to give, I agree with what Lindsay just said, is that, right, the feeling is quite frankly the problem, right? How I feel and how you feel could be different. And so it can lead to gatekeeping. It can lead to discrimination. It can lead to, just being too hard for a volunteer board to figure out what we mean in the zoning. And we did, in the recommendations, we did make recommendations to be more specific. So for example, section 8.5, which is about accessory dwelling units, the original language in the zoning reads, the purpose of the accessory dwelling unit ordinance is to protect stability, property values, and the residential character of a neighborhood. And we are recommending that we replace it with protect the stability, property values, and the architectural design of the neighboring buildings. So it's not.
I think that helps.
Right. So it's like, what does everything around you look like? And it makes it a little bit more clear of what we're trying to protect, because character could mean all kinds of things. And at least if we're talking about architecture, we should say we're talking about architecture. If we're talking about, open space, we should say we're talking about open space and be just more specific.
Yeah, and I'll also add, there has been sociological research that shows this has been used to mean the people who could potentially move into the housing that's being built, which is also a huge part of the problem. We're trying to keep it from being used as an exclusionary measure.
Mm-hmm. Did you want to make a comment?
I agree wholeheartedly. We wouldn't want to have it be used in that way.
But it is currently used in that way. I just want to be clear that in every single affordable housing permitting meeting I have been in, someone in the audience has stood up and said, this is going to ruin the character of Easthampton. This does not fit into the character of the neighborhood. It comes up every time. And if character does not exist in our zoning undefined, then the zoning board or the planning board doesn't feel obligated to take that comment and think about how it's going to impact their decision, because we're defining character or we're excluding it, and we're not leaving it to the subjective, way to be defined by the people that are making the decision.
I hear you. Good, thank you for that explanation.
Any questions about this?
No, I agree.
Originally, the hope was that because we have talked about this quite a bit, that we would be able to move something of this section to the planning board so that they can begin to dissect, explore, talk about sections 1 through 4. I know that there seems to be a little bit of concern around the definition of family, but that's also an opportunity. Maybe that's a conversation that could be had there as well, that we figure that kind of section out. But I know that this is, you're not seeing this for the first time because it's been on our agenda for a while and you probably saw it in the original packet, etc. But you're having a conversation about this for the first time, but this is the second time we've had this conversation. So that was the original intent, was to try to move something to the planning board so that we could kind of move this process along, as well as give us more space to be able to talk, I think, about the more meatier section of the document around kind of the zoning pieces and things like that. So I'm open to your thoughts about moving this to the planning board. Or moving it back to council to be able to move it to the planning board.
I think I would be okay moving it to planning board. I think it warrants a conversation about how we're defining family. And I just want to make sure that our definition of family is not restrictive. And I think getting rid of the regardless of relationship status is really helpful in that.
I think it is too. I'm a little reluctant to send anything to the planning board without having our heads together for sure on any understanding of the term family at this point. I think it would be helpful to process that and come to agreement. I know you folks have met, this is the second time you've met to discuss this. My first, I would like a little bit of breathing room. Just, I mean, we could could we take this up in our next meeting? And then send it along?
Well, the next meeting, there'll be a different meeting.
Then we'll have a different.
Right, but they're gonna have to go through all of this all over again. Over to the new council, because we're gonna have a new council, we'll have a new committee. Potentially.
Then they would need to know about it anyway, wouldn't they? I hate to keep anybody in the dark on it.
I think when it comes to the definition of family, the reason I know more about the definitions of family is because of my profession. And, you know, because I teach about definitions of family, I think it's warranted a conversation to make sure that the definition that we have here is not too restrictive. And I think that what I'm hearing is that it's not too restrictive based on those things. Now, the definition that they have of family right now, like if we look at that definition, could you just repeat the definition that you have, Jana?
The current definition or the new definition?
New definition?
The proposed new definition is all the people who occupy a single housing unit, regardless of their relationship to one another.
So if that's the case, and I had a bunch of college friends where none of us could afford a house on our own, but if we pooled our resources together, we would also be allowed to buy into that neighborhood. So it's just getting rid of the definition of family that usually restricts it, where no, you'd only be able to have 2 people or 3 people that were unrelated. So by getting rid of the related part, it just opens up a wider definition of who could live together.
Which I think is happening, right? More and more individual
Yeah.
people are buying houses together because they're needing a home, and so they're kind of just pooling their resources to be able to buy a home.
I think it makes sense to recognize that. I want to be sure we recognize it and then reflect it throughout all of our zoning.
So is it possible, like, if hypothetically we were to send this to the planning board or back to council to send to the planning board, between now and then, this could be explored in terms of how this might play out throughout the
Yes, I think we're talking also though about 2 different things. One is to remove any reference to family as it, not any reference, but most reference to family.
Yep.
Versus changing the definition of family to this very open-ended definition.
Right.
And so that, I mean, there's I think they're 2 different conversations.
It was my understanding that you're like, can we get rid of all references to family? And your response was that would create too much confusion between a single dwelling unit, a multi.
It's just the way that it's referred to in the ordinance right now. So that's why I think it's doable. It just would take carrying it through the entire document to make sure that.
It'd be like removing sexist language from a document.
Yeah, it's like
wouldn't it?
find and replace family with unit for, single family would be a single unit dwelling, a multifamily would be a multi-unit dwelling, for example, all of that. The other piece of it, and it kind of comes in regardless of if the definition and term is in there or not, is differentiating, if you want to, between boarding, lodging house types of arrangements compared to folks who have a relationship to each other.
So I think that was my question of, I don't know that we're at a place of removing it or not removing it. I think if we were to send this to the planning board with the definition as it is, but at the planning board, could we also have a conversation about whether or not we could remove it and be able to have it throughout?
And I think it is more of a conversation. I can certainly do the legwork of like, here's what it would look like if we replaced it.
Right.
That's no problem. But I do think it's more conversation.
Yep.
Do we get into any issues with the definition of a boarding house or lodging house?
That's what I'm not clear on, is if it blurs the line completely between what we have now as a single family dwelling versus a lodging house that has one kitchen and, a number of bedrooms that are let out to different people that don't know each other or, don't have any other sort of personal relationship.
I understand the lodging houses too, they all have different individual leases, whereas in this situation, it seems like they would just have like a share.
But it's not clarified. So that's the thing. It's like there might just be, it might just be tweaking it. I don't. I think it just there's more conversation to have about it, about intention of what we want, and implication.
it would mean that we would probably have, if we brought in the fire department.
It's gonna, yeah,
They're
they're gonna have a different perspective on it through the lens of the code. For sure.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that that's where we want to go.
But there are different, I mean, the way it's defined in zoning versus the building and fire code. Our zoning is what would ultimately apply when it came to the use, whether it's allowed. The requirement for sprinklers or this, that, or the other thing is irrelevant to how we define it.
So the question is, do we want to have lodging house, especially if it's how would we want to have a lodging house in any zone, in any district in the city?
Where
Or
single,
boarding house?
where single unit dwellings are permitted and multi
And are we making a recommendation on that?
And so back to the, there's obviously more conversation that's going to be had, whether it's in here or in the planning. But I think my concern, like I said, is if we continue this conversation, it's going to be a completely new committee, and they're going to have to start basically all over again, looking at this. So. Which is an option if hypothetically you and I and you are not on this committee again moving forward.
Well, I certainly am happy to put in the work on this committee in the third, but I would hope that you both would also, because I think when we put our heads together, we come up with something that makes a lot of sense. So that's my 2 cents on it.
So are you saying to move it forward or not?
I would recommend that we resolve the issues that we pointed to and get those resolved and then move it forward.
But the issue that we're resolving is how we want to define family or how we want to, because I'm saying from my perspective and my professional opinion, when it comes to the definition of family, that the one that I'm seeing here, I don't see how that will have more restrictive of family. Even if we say family throughout the document, if we move it forward here and we move it to the planning committee, when we open up that meeting, we could start the conversation right there. One thing that we still want to talk to you about is the definition of family.
Yep, and that makes sense.
And so, but that way they would already have the document and we would just not be lagging the thing for that long.
Absolutely. Now this makes a lot of sense. And we want to talk to you about lodging house and boarding house definitions.
Right.
Because we're kind of.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to look at it holistically.
Right.
Right. Given that that we haven't made a recommendation to have a certain language or to make a note that yes, those 2 issues are issues that we would like included in the referral to the planning board. Is it possible to write a cover letter to the planning board and say those 2 issues are issues that we are still reviewing and thinking about, but wanted you to have this information at the close of this term?
I think whatever the planning board reviews, just like from a legal standpoint, I think whatever the planning board reviews needs to be like a finite proposal for them to act upon. So I think it's like either, give it to them with it the way it's written now, with another definition, or with not including that. Does that make sense? Like they can't, and the council can't, you can't post a public hearing and then what comes out of that is not reasonably able to be predicted from the public hearing notice and from the document that the public was able to review prior to. Does that all make sense?
Yeah.
Trying to explain it.
Right. In my opinion, I think that we should keep the definition as it is proposed, because I think that people understand the word family, and I think that people have differing understandings of what that is. And so to me, it just makes a logical connection for people who maybe aren't understanding it in the same way, that this is how we're defining it. Instead of confusing people by single dwelling or multi-dwelling or whatever. And that's just my opinion of.
It's change. It's change in the language and change in the way we're thinking. Yeah.
So, and in that particular way, I think there's continuity of helping people to understand that family now means something different. And we're changing that context within, or we're changing that definition within the context of our zoning.
So I don't feel strongly one way or the other. I just want it to be consistent and to be something that we can say, yeah, that we have a definition of family, and it doesn't mean anything to do with it. It includes all unrelated parties, and that's
It's your chosen family, essentially.
Chosen family.
Yeah.
Okay. That's an
Well, and doesn't this also then go before the planning board to have this whole discussion as well? And like, I don't know, I would think that group of people might be a little bit like better equipped to wrestle with the particulars of how this might impact edge cases and like other like areas where it comes up in their jurisdiction where they're making those decisions. So I don't know. To me, it just makes sense because we've been talking about this for a really long time to move it forward to that group, because like these questions are valid, but I think that body might be better equipped to answer those questions, and it might be better to improve the ordinance, the proposals there.
I mean, I see it as an educational opportunity as well, but that's.
With those issues on the table, I certainly dug into those issues. Just wanted to have us address them. And it sounds like you're going to be addressing those anyway and bringing them to that meeting.
Yes, again, I think when it comes, just think from a procedural standpoint, if you're wanting to also look at the definitions of like lodging house, what is given to you need to give something to the planning board to work from. You can't just like write a cover letter and say, we're thinking about looking at this definition. Like there has to be some proposed change for them to review.
By submitting what we're submitting, have we locked ourselves in? But by submitting the recommended proposal, have we locked ourselves in to a scenario where the expectation would be that now that we're having this wide, I'm calling it a wide definition, a broader definition of family. Almost enough to say there's no definition, so let's eliminate it. That we aren't opening up that we have made a decision regarding lodging or boarding houses. And that's the question. Are we submitting something that if it's approved and comes back in its current form, have we locked ourselves in?
If what goes to the planning board and to the council for the public hearing does not include changes to the lodging house definition, that has to be done through a separate public hearing process.
Do we want to submit something that includes lodging and boarding in this definition?
The definition of family?
In the definition of family, since we're not referring to all unrelated parties being a lodging house or a boarding house. It does not form of those rules. That's what it sounds like we're saying.
I think that there's a middle ground that can be struck, which is just adding something about single housekeeping unit, which is sort of like a legal term for people that live together in the functional equivalent of
single
housekeeping, single housekeeping unit. That is,
I like that.
It's, you know,
I think that covers it.
The way it's functional equivalent of a traditional family whose members are an interactive group of persons jointly occupying a single dwelling unit, including the joint use of responsibility for common areas, sharing household activities and responsibilities. they have chosen to jointly occupy and be responsible for the property together. Like there's just sort of I think it's what we're talking about. It's just not clear in the document right now. And again, it's like a legal concept. So we'd have it to fall back on.
So where would we add that if we wanted to
I think
have
it's
that
just,
catch-all?
I think it's just tweaking the family definition that's proposed to include a reference to, you know, people, regardless of their relation, who are living together as a single housekeeping unit.
So, Chaim, you have that document. Can we make that edit?
Yeah, I guess my question is, I'm seeing a very simple edit, which would just be all the people who occupy a single housekeeping unit, regardless of their relationship to one another. Would housekeeping unit be understood as also a housing unit in every other place in the zoning where a housing unit is mentioned? If we don't also update it to housekeeping in all of those places, I guess.
Oh yeah, no, I'm thinking just in the family definition, it's like just adding that reference to people living together as a single house. Like it's how they're living together rather than who is living together. Does that make sense?
Good point.
They're keeping the house together.
Yeah, okay. I think that makes sense.
You can make that change in the document.
Yeah.
I think that solves the boarding and lodging issue.
I believe it does because the lodging house definition or lodging, there's a lodging house and a lodging unit definition, but the lodging unit definition references single housekeeping, like it says one or more rooms for the use of one or more individuals not living in a single housekeeping unit.
Right.
So I think that would solve the problem.
So if we added it to family, then we're clearly differentiating.
Thank you.
Between the two.
I think that helps the clarification for these purposes. With that, I'd be willing to move along.
All right. So I will take a motion to send the zoning ordinance recommendations report from the housing partnership and the ordinance committee with those amendments back to city council to send to with recommendation to send to the planning department or planning board.
I would second that motion.
So motion and a second. So I think I needed a so move first, but
So move.
second. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? No. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Awesome. Great. Thank you for that clarification. Thank you for that. So we are going to send sections 1 through 4 back to city council. Set a public hearing. So at the first city council meeting, we will have a discussion about this. And so if you can be there, we'll send it up to the planning.
Okay.
And so I think that's everything, and we've been here a while, so I'll take the motion.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.